Demetrian Titus, a primaris lieutenant of the Ultramarines' Second Company, hails from the agri-world of Tarentus within Ultramar. Born some 80 years before the Battle of Macragge, Titus was the only child of a modest family. Chosen as an aspirant by the Ultramarines' 10th Company, he excelled in every trial, earning his place among the Astartes. Though his early years as a space marine were marked by a struggle with his temper, Titus grew into a decorated warrior. Yet his reputation became shadowed during a campaign against the forces of Chaos, where he was grievously wounded while slaying a Chaos sorcerer, the sole survivor of his squad. This event led to whispers and doubts among his battle brothers, questioning how he alone had emerged alive. Despite the suspicions, Titus's record of decisive action and remarkable skill in battle, often against impossible odds, solidified his standing within the chapter. 50 years later, Titus joined the Ultramarines' Second Company under the command of Captain Severus Agamemnon during the First Tyrannic War. Though the Second Company was fighting elsewhere when Hive Fleet Behemoth assaulted Macragge, they arrived too late to aid in the victory. Instead, they joined the Imperial reinforcements in purging the remnants of the Hive Fleet from Ultramar's worlds. As the Ultramarines rebuilt their shattered chapter, Agamemnon was promoted to captain of the First Company, and his first sergeant, Lucian Trajan, assumed command of the Second Company. Titus, then appointed sergeant of Trajan's command squad, led multiple kill team units in the cleansing of Hive Fleet Behemoth, honing his expertise in studying Xenos tactics through close-quarters combat. Under the tutelage of Agamemnon, both Titus and Trajan flourished as warriors and leaders. A century later, the Second Company responded to the besieged imperial world of Beta Arcturus, invaded by the Asuryani of craft-world Biel-Tan. Upon arrival, Trajan led half the company in a daring strike against the Xenos Autarch leader, while the Righteous Fury engaged Biel-Tan warships. Trajan bested the Autarch in single combat, causing the surviving Xenos forces to flee. However, the victory was marred when the fleeing Xenos captured the Ultramarine Leandros. In a bid to rescue him, Trajan handed command of the company to Titus and led a combat squad to free the young warrior. It was a trap, and Trajan was ambushed and killed. In the aftermath, Titus rallied the Second Company, driving off the Xenos and recovering both Leandros and Trajan's body. Upon returning to Macragge, Chapter Master Marnius Calga appointed Titus as the new captain of the Second Company. Though many of his battle brothers believed him well suited for the role, Titus had never sought such heights, preferring to serve as sergeant. Nevertheless, he accepted the mantle, though he felt the weight of his predecessor's legacy. Titus led the Second Company to numerous victories, often aboard the Righteous Fury. His prowess as a warrior and strategist earned him the respect of senior Ultramarines, including Calga and Agamemnon, who regarded him as an exemplary figure embodying the humility expected of their chapter. After 150 years of service to the Ultramarines and 10 years as captain of the Second Company, Titus was sent to defend Grier from the Orc Warg of Warboss Grimskull. The 203rd Cadian Regiment, led by 2nd Lieutenant Mira, suffered heavy losses, leaving her as the last surviving officer. During the battle, Titus fought alongside brother Leandros and his close friend, veteran Sergeant Sidonus. Together they secured an Imperial Titan manufactorum and aided Mira against the Orcs. Their mission took a dark turn when they received a message from Inquisitor Drogon, requesting assistance in retrieving the power source of an experimental warp weapon, the Psychic Scourge. Despite successfully securing the power source, Titus was exposed to its warp energy, yet inexplicably survived, raising suspicions within Drogon and Leandros. As they moved to Drogon's laboratory to use the Scourge, Drogon revealed himself to be possessed by a demon and used the weapon to open a warp rift on Grier. From the rift emerged the Chaos Lord Nemeroth and his warband, the Chosen of Nemeroth, initiating a chaos invasion. Titus, Sidonus and Leandros fought their way to an Imperial Titan hangar, where Titus slew Warboss Grimskull. Commandeering the warlord Titan Invictus, Titus attempted to close the warp rift, but their efforts only contained it. Entrusting the power source to Sidonus, Titus and Leandros held off Nemeroth's forces while Sidonus attempted to evacuate it. Sidonus was ambushed and killed by Nemeroth, who escaped with the power source, intending to ascend to demonhood. Titus pursued Nemeroth to Grier's orbital spire, interrupting the Chaos Lord's transformation by tackling him off the spire. During their fall, Titus killed Nemeroth and shattered the power source, closing the warp rift. Yet, once again, Titus emerged unscathed from the warp's corrupting influence, leading Leandros to report him to the Inquisition for potential heresy. Titus was confronted by Ordo Malleus Inquisitor Jerome Thrax, and to spare the Second Company and the 203rd Cadian Regiment from the Inquisition's wrath, Titus allowed himself to be taken into custody. Before departing, he expressed his disdain for Leandros. Despite Chapter Master Calga's repeated requests for Titus's return, the Inquisition remained silent, leaving the Second Company without a captain. Cato Sicarius eventually succeeded Titus as the Second Company's commander, and a statue of Titus was erected in the Hall of Heroes within the Ultramarines Fortress Monastery. His memory was further honoured by Ultramarine Malum Kaido, who undertook a personal mission to Grier to investigate the fate of a fragment of the Psychic Scourge's power source. In truth, Titus spent the next century under the relentless scrutiny of Inquisitor Thrax, enduring psychic scourging and brutal mind trawls. Thrax, a student of the Imperium's history, viewed the Space Marines as a potential threat to humanity's survival, akin to heresy and the warp. Despite numerous tests proving Titus's lack of corruption, Thrax kept him imprisoned within a remote inquisitorial watch station, alongside other Space Marines who had drawn his suspicion. Titus bore these trials stoically, kept in a stasis cell between bouts of testing. This continued until Thrax was slain by the Grey Knights during a purge of the Grey Slayers chapter, after he became possessed by a demon. In the subsequent Ordo Malleus investigation, Thrax's holdings were seized, and another Inquisitor discovered Titus and the other imprisoned Space Marines. Rather than covering up Thrax's disgrace, the Inquisitor sent the Space Marines to be evaluated at the Death Watch fortress, Watcher Keep. Titus was eventually cleared of any accusations of heresy, and though he banished thoughts of Thrax and Drogon from his mind, the experiences he endured under their scrutiny forever changed his perspective on the Inquisition. Though no longer a prisoner, Titus felt adrift, having received no word from the Ultramarines since his departure from Grier. This silence led him to believe that his actions had brought dishonor to the chapter, and he came to the conclusion that he was no longer worthy of the name Ultramarine. Embracing this belief, Titus willingly joined the Death Watch forces at Watcher Keep under the guise of Black Shield Nullus, seeing it as an opportunity to continue serving the Emperor and the Imperium in anonymity. He was content to die fighting the Xenos foes of humanity, and his chance came during the Fourth Tyrannic War. When High Fleet Grendilus invaded the Bastior subsector, Watcher Keep's Watchmaster Vaedrian Shenol led Watch Company Primus into battle against the Tyranids. The company was divided to reinforce various worlds under siege, and Nullus's kill team, Kasseran, was assigned to the defense of Kadaku. However, during their descent to the beleaguered planet, Kasseran's Corvus Blackstar was brought down by flying Tyranid bioforms. The downed craft was quickly overrun by the Xenos, and Nullus sustained grievous injuries from a carnifex, while the rest of his kill team was slain. As death closed in, salvation arrived in the form of an Ultramarines Soulblade strike force. Led by Chief Librarian Varotigurius, the Soulblade force had sensed Titus's presence and diverted the strike cruiser Righteous Fury to Kadaku. The Ultramarines were unaware of what had become of their lost captain until they discovered his involvement with the Death Watch. Although they arrived too late to save Kadaku, Tigurius's forces managed to hold the Tyrannids at bay, long enough to extract the surviving Death Watch members, including the severely wounded Titus. Recognizing the dire state of his injuries, Tigurius brought Titus aboard the Righteous Fury, initiating the process to reunite him with the Ultramarines. Titus's injuries were so severe that his only chance of survival was to undergo the Calgarian rites aboard the strike cruiser, transforming him into a Primaris Space Marine. The procedure was successful, and as Titus recovered, still unconscious, Tigurius psychically examined him to ensure he bore no mark of chaos. Although some Ultramarines harboured doubts about Titus's long absence, Tigurius declared him free from any taint, dispelling any lingering suspicions. Upon receiving this news, Chapter Master Marneus Calga immediately reinstated Titus into the ranks of the Ultramarines, putting an end to any doubts about his loyalty. However, while Titus was restored to the chapter's second company, he did not resume his former role as captain, as Sevastus Acheron now held that title. Instead, Titus was appointed as one of the second company's lieutenants. Despite Acheron's recent promotion from the 10th Company, Titus accepted his new rank without hesitation when he awoke. Reunited with his chapter, and once again bearing the name of Ultramarine, Titus was filled with renewed resolve, ready to unleash the wrath of the Ultramarines upon the enemies of the Imperium. His last known deed so far is a fight alongside the Ultramarines in defense of the hive world Avarax, which was under siege by a Tyrannid invasion. Third, Tyrannic War. Hive Fleet Leviathan was the third and largest of the Tyrannid hive fleets to descend upon the Milky Way galaxy from the intergalactic void. Its arrival in the year 997 of the 41st millennium marked the onset of the Third Tyrannic War, a cataclysmic conflict for the Imperium of man. This devastating invasion was momentarily halted by the actions of Inquisitor Lord Fidus Cryptman of the Ordo Xenos, who successfully diverted a significant portion of the Hive fleet towards the Orc Empire of Octarius, within the Octarius system. The densely populated green-skinned cities, swarming with Orcoid life, quickly attracted the majority of Leviathan into the star systems comprising the Orc Empire. Cryptman's strategy proved effective, as the two Xeno species became locked in a brutal struggle, known as the Octarius War, which diverted their attention away from Imperial space. Meanwhile, another tendril of Leviathan was confronted by the Blood Angels chapter and their successors among the sanguinary brotherhood of the Adeptus Astartes at the Battle of Baal during the early era Indomitus. This battle saw an unexpected intervention from the demonic blood legions of Khorne, commanded by the bloodthirster Kabanda, aiding the Blood Angels in their desperate defense. Despite these setbacks, Leviathan's hive mind adapted its strategy, shifting its focus to the weakened Imperial defenses in the remote regions of Segmentum Pacificus in the galactic west. This maneuver occurred while Imperial forces, under the command of Primarch Guilliman, were fully engaged in the Indomitus Crusade within the Segmentum Solar and Segmentum Ultima of the Imperium Sanctus. This new wave of assault, spearheaded by massive tendrils of the Leviathan codenamed Hive Fleet Grandillus, Hive Fleet Nautilon, and Hive Fleet Promothor, signalled the beginning of what Imperial historians would later name the Fourth Tyrannic War. The Third Tyrannic War itself had erupted less than 5 standard years after the defeat of Hive Fleet Kraken in the Second Tyrannic War, when Inquisitor Lord Fidus Cryptman discerned the ominous signs of another Tyrannid invasion in the year 997 of the 41st millennium. He initiated the Cryptman census, sacrificing the lives of dozens of astropaths in a desperate bid to contact worlds scattered across the fringes of the Imperium. Slowly, the responses or the absence thereof formed a pattern, allowing the venerable Inquisitor to chart the course of the newest Tyrannid Hive fleet to enter the Milky Way galaxy. This Hive fleet was codenamed Leviathan by Imperial scholars, and it approached from beneath the galactic plane, attacking from two widely spaced points like the jaws of a closing beast, severing vast portions of the galaxy from warp travel or astropathic communication. At great cost to human life, a combined force of Planetary Defense Force troops, 2 Astra Militarum regiments, the Ultramarines and Mortifactors chapters of Astartes, and a Deathwatch kill team under Cryptman's command succeeded in crushing the left half of the Leviathan on the world of Tarsis Ultra. This victory destroyed the Tyrannid forces closest to Terra and re-established astropathic communication with the worlds trapped between Leviathan's advancing jaws. The Imperium had achieved its first significant victory. However, Leviathan continued its relentless advance through the Imperium, leaving devastation in its wake. Perhaps its greatest triumph was the conquest of the vital Forge world of Griffon IV, home to the Legio Griffonicus Titan Legion. Realizing the need to slow the Hive Fleet's progress to allow the Imperial Navy's battle fleets Solar and Tempestus time to muster, Cryptman made a grim decision. He ordered the establishment of a cordon. Every world within its bounds was to be evacuated and subjected to immediate exterminatus wherever possible, denying the Tyrannids the biomass needed to replenish their numbers. This cold and calculated act, though strategically sound, resulted in the Imperium's greatest act of genocide against its own people since the Horus Heresy. Cryptman was denounced as a radical and a traitor, and when migrating orcs claimed a score of the former human worlds, he was stripped of his title and cast out from the Inquisition by his peers. Yet, Cryptman still had loyal allies within the Deathwatch, and devised a plan to halt Leviathan's advance without further loss of human life. When a Djinn-stealer-infested space hulk drifted from the warp, members of the Deathwatch loyal to Cryptman captured a brood in stasis. Using these captured live Djinn-stealers, the Inquisitor orchestrated a Tyrannid invasion within the orc-held Octarius system, dangerously close to Leviathan's projected path. The crowded orc cities, brimming with teeming life, became the perfect lure, drawing the entirety of Leviathan into the tight cluster of orc star systems known as the Orc Empire of Octarius. The plan succeeded, and both Xenos races became deeply embroiled in a brutal conflict that would come to be known as the Octarius War. One unsettling reality remains. Both Tyrannids and orcs thrive on war, and should the Tyrannids emerge victorious, the Imperium would face an even greater threat. Unlike other races, the Tyrannids lose no military strength or resources with victory. Their casualties and still-living warrior strains are reabsorbed by the invading hive ships, along with the remains of the conquered worlds. Every victory only strengthens them further. The conflict within the Octarius War also means that the Tyrannids will assimilate vast quantities of the strong, survivable, and highly adaptable orcoid DNA that makes the greenskins such tenacious survivors and formidable opponents, incorporating these traits into their own bioconstructs. Indeed, worlds on the periphery of the conflict have begun reporting sightings of Tyrannid organisms larger and more formidable than ever before. The implications of Cryptman's manipulation of this alien threat are too terrible to contemplate. Shortly after Hive Fleet Leviathan first assaulted the worlds of humanity, A shadowy council within the Imperium known as the Strategic Collective began analysing every detail of the Tyrannid invasions. Their conclusion was as stark as it was terrifying. The fleets faced by the Imperium to date are merely parts of a far greater whole, and this entirety will arrive at the Imperium's borders within less than a Terran century. They estimate that mobilization levels must be increased by a minimum of 500%, effectively including every able-bodied man, woman and child on every world in Segmentum's Solar, Obscurus and Tempestus, to stand even a chance of stopping the Tyrannids. The Fourth Tyrannic War began in the era Indomitus, when the largest mass of Hive Fleet Leviathan yet encountered attacked the western reaches of the Segmentum Pacificus, seeking to strike at a relatively undefended region of the galaxy, while the defenders of the Imperium were preoccupied with the forces of chaos spilling out of the Great Rift. This great Tyrannid assault commenced with a coordinated attack from above and below the galactic plane by 3 new tendrils of Leviathan, designated by the Imperium as Hive Fleet Nautilon, Hive Fleet Promothor, and Hive Fleet Grendillus. These tendrils advanced in parallel, moving inexorably towards their ultimate goal, terror in the Segmentum Solar. With the Imperium's defenders distracted by the pressing demands of the Indomitus Crusade, few human forces were initially available to stand against this renewed and terrifying threat. Fourth Tyrannic War. The Fourth Tyrannic War is a colossal struggle between the Tyrannids of Hive Fleet Leviathan and the Imperium during the Indomitus era. Following the devastation inflicted by Fleet Leviathan on the Ultima, Solar and Tempestus segmentums, during the Third Tyrannic War the Imperium managed to halt the majority of the Tyrannid forces at Tarsis Ultra. However, Hive Fleet Leviathan remained a formidable threat, attacking from an unexpected direction, the Segmentum Pacificus. Something monstrous was traversing the interstellar void with predatory intent. Relentlessly, and with cold determination, it crossed the remote expanse of the Segmentum Pacificus, where it would soon find its prey unprepared and trap them in a nightmare. It began with absence and silence. Deep space satellite servers, which had reliably transmitted data for centuries, suddenly ceased to function. Astromagnetic beacons in the Asmodeox and Morpheum sectors of Segmentum Pacificus flickered out one after another. At first, these phenomena went unnoticed even by the sector commanders, as many mundane causes could explain such interruptions: equipment malfunctions, solar storms. The imperial bureaucracy, with its obsession with protocol, responded with its customary lethargy, ranging from slow to glacial. Moreover, no distress calls were received, and the lack of communication was misinterpreted as the absence of any real threat. Compounding the issue, the Asmodeox sector was already embroiled in the chaos of an Orkwag that wreaked havoc across the Polydara, Byroth and Shaley subsectors. Meanwhile, 12 systems in the Morpheum sector had been consumed by the warp storm Gogmagor. This allowed the spreading darkness to linger far longer than it should have. When the truth finally emerged, it came in a cascade of horrors. The high astropath of the Morpheum sector manifested a vision of tendrils, claws, and screaming faces that wiped out half of the sector's command staff. In the Byroth subsector, Orc attacks suddenly ceased a relief to the beleaguered generals, which soon turned to horror when the next wave of invaders proved to be Tyrannids. Regions already weakened by traitor incursions or the assaults of the leagues of Votan, such as the Tektros system or the Trinary Canyon cluster, or seemingly secure regions like the stars of Heratus and the Metolian belt, reported rising tides of refugees fleeing the warp in overcrowded, battle-damaged ships. Some vessels bore the scars of acid burns or the crushing marks of colossal tentacles or claws. Others carried Xenos bioinfestations on their decks and were immediately destroyed. Yet even this was not enough to prevent Tyrannid spores and bioforms from penetrating the atmospheres of Uncolos, Metrophia, Philodan Prime, and a dozen other worlds. Ships that still contained disciplined troops provided more accurate reports of the growing threat. Gradually, a terrifying picture emerged within the minds of the Imperial Command. Two new colossal tendrils of Hive Fleet Leviathan seemingly acting in concert. The tendril within the Asmodeox sector was designated Hive Fleet Nautilon. The one in the Morpheum sector was named Hive Fleet Promothor. It became increasingly apparent that if these tendrils were not stopped, they would eventually reach the Segmentum Solar, and in the worst-case scenario, even Terra itself. While some planetary governors fled their worlds, others fortified their positions, and forces like the Space Marines and the Imperial Navy met the Tyranids wherever they were found. However, all attempts to resist proved futile. The Tyranid forces were too numerous, and few battles were recorded or remembered as they all faded beneath the shadow of the Tyranid onslaught. The grim news reached Terra thanks to 3 Eyes of the Emperor, who disembarked from a ship that refused to answer to anyone but Captain General Trajan Valoris. Having already heard rumours through his own networks, Valoris now had the confirmation of his worst suspicions. After convincing the High Lords of Terra of the immediacy of the danger requiring both threats and politicking, Valoris amassed a formidable fighting force. Strongholds of strategy and command sanctuaries awakened, colossal numbers of troops and war material were mobilized, all necessary for waging this new tyrannic war. Numerous regiments were assembled, though it took time. Some were drawn from existing war zones, while others were hastily recruited and trained. Support convoys converged from multiple subsectors, despite the dangers of warp travel and corsair attacks. All the while, Hive Fleets Nautilon and Promothor drew ever closer. However, the elite forces of the Imperium were able to mobilize more swiftly. The strike forces of the Adeptus Astartes, the Adeptus Auroritas, lances of Imperial Knights, and the retinues of the Adeptus Mechanicus Technomagi, all prepared for the coming war. Though some pursued their own agendas, most joined fast-attack fleets known as Solar Blades. Due to a lack of intelligence on Tyranid disposition and objectives, the Solar Blades were granted significant autonomy. Beyond being assigned to attack specific tendrils, they were entrusted with assessing the battle's situations and acting accordingly. It was hoped that in this way they could wage a guerrilla war against the overwhelming Xenos threat. Many Solar Blades were commanded by Space Marines, captains, librarians, lieutenants, chaplains, and even, on rare occasions, ancient dreadnoughts. Some leaders were already legendary, like First Captain Agemon of the Ultramarines, Kaivan Shrike of the Raven Guard, or the Dracht Epistolary of the Necropolis Falcons, while others forged their legends in these brutal conflicts. Others were led by high nobles from the houses of knights or canonesses of the orders of the Adeptus Auroritas. House Tyrannis contributed no fewer than 20 barons and baronesses, each commanding at least 1 knight lance. The Prioris Convent of Terra provided numerous canonesses and palatines from the orders of the Ebon Chalice, Silver Shroud, the Sacred Rose, and others to lead their Solar Blades. These were often the largest fleets, as they included not only the Sisters of Battle, but also the Black Templars and other elite warriors of the faith, accompanied by shiploads of zealots eager to purge the Xenos. Trajan Valoris himself and several of his custodian brothers took command of Solar Blades, viewing this as part of their sacred duty to protect the Golden Throne and its occupant. One by one, the Solar Blades departed the Segmentum Solar, heading toward the looming nightmare that threatened the Imperium. Although the Solar Blades were publicly heralded as the Imperium's hope for victory, Solar Lord Leontus and his advisors, ever pragmatic, knew that a contingency plan was essential should the tides of war turn against them. They meticulously analyzed potential patterns of Tyranid advance, pinpointing frontier systems within the Segmentum Pacificus, where the Xenos were most likely to break through. After poring over vast amounts of data, navigational charts and strategic omens, Leontus personally designated critical anchor worlds. These worlds lay along major warp transit routes that, as far as could be determined, remained swift and relatively reliable paths to the west. These anchor worlds became the linchpins of what would come to be known as the Fourth Tyrannic War. By the time these designations were finalized, the first wave of Imperial Guard and Navy forces was already prepared for deployment. They plunged into the warp, led by the mighty phalanx which carried Leontus, his command staff, and a formidable contingent of Space Marines to the most strategically vital world, Sanctum, located in the Bastior subsector. Hive Fleet Leviathan had already unleashed horrific destruction upon the Segmentum Pacificus before the Solar Blade's arrival, but the true threat had yet to reveal itself. As the Solar Blades engaged the tendrils Promothor and Nautilon, they encountered overwhelming concentrations of Tyrannid forces across multiple systems, planets, void docks, space stations and shipwrecks. Any settlement or fortification that could not escape the Tyrannid advance was besieged or overrun. The Tyrannids did not move with haste. Instead, their fleets intertwined and separated as new prey presented itself. At times, they would retreat to assault human or Xenos enclaves that had withstood an initial attack, methodically stripping worlds of every last molecule of organic life, breaching space stations to devour all inhabitants, or scouring asteroid fields for resources, thus allowing them to outrun and outmaneuver their opponents. Despite suffering horrific casualties, the compact and swift nature of the Solar Blades proved advantageous. Repeatedly, they struck vital targets, executed evacuations, and launched punitive strikes against synaptic beasts, hive ships, or entire Tyrannid swarms. Some Solar Blades managed to strike and escape the jaws of the shadow in the warp, while others fortified the most defensible positions they encountered, preparing for a final stand. Although these sacrificial campaigns resulted in silence from these garrisons, each bought precious time for further evacuations or the reinforcement of the next line of defense. Gradually, the relentless advance of Nautilon and Promothor began to stall and fragment thanks to human resilience and the intervention of other races. For a moment, it seemed that these tendrils might be defeated. However, hope is a treacherous thing in the Indomitus era, a lesson made painfully clear by the arrival of a new threat, the tendril Grendillus. This third tendril cut through the chaos wrought by the first two, its warnings and reports lost or confused among the others. The Mozart cluster, the Rendhor belt, the Strait of Staithe, and the outposts of the Votan leagues in the stars of Unhart all were devoured before anyone even realized they were under attack. It was a Faustus battle group from Fleet Sextius that finally raised the alarm. Since Solar Lord Arcadian Leontus had established his extensive command staff on Sanctum, and since the phalanx had taken up orbit, efforts to secure the pivotal world had been redoubled. This battle group had been dispatched to purge any pirates, heretics, or Xenos they encountered. Without warning, two of the battle group's contingents vanished. The third contingent had last been positioned in the Stanghalder system, while the fourth was in the Iron Tower system. The 2nd and 11th contingents were sent to investigate, but they too disappeared. Growing increasingly concerned, Group Leader Tyson Jacobi relayed the troubling news to both Sector Command and Leontus himself, before regrouping with his remaining forces in the Cerceril system. It was during this consolidation that a handful of ships from the 3rd and 11th contingents emerged from the warp, badly damaged and bearing a dire warning. A new tendril was rising from beneath the galactic plane. Though the reports were fragmented, the video logs and auger readings did not lie. Tyrannid biofleets had completely overrun the outermost systems of the Bastior subsector in numbers sufficient to obliterate entire star fields. The new tendril was named Grendillus and classified as a Vermilion Alpha threat. The safety of Solar Lord Leontus and the Sanctum Point world could not be jeopardized, so Jacobe sent out messages with all the updated intelligence, gathered his warships, and prepared to reconnoitre and, if possible, slow or halt the Tyrannid advance. News of Grendillus spread through the subsector worlds like wildfire, igniting panic-fueled riots on Lethnor and Gainder's Hope, fanatical fervour on the fortress world of Misfortune, and widespread denial among the governors and clergy of the Gallows Tower system, who branded any mention of the tendril as heresy. Amidst this turmoil, tensions soared between those who adhered to local command and the supporters of Leontus, culminating in the civil conflict known as the War of the Shut-Eyes. Despite the internal strife, the subsector's defenders responded to the looming threat with commendable swiftness and resolve. Imperial Guard regiments assumed defensive positions, vast concentrations of armoured vehicles and artillery fortified key spaceports and fortresses, and power was restored to defence lasers and void shields. Airships and spacecraft were prepped for the impending assault. However, as more intelligence reached Leontus's command, it became increasingly clear that the full might of the subsector would be insufficient to halt Grendillus. The tendril, whether by design, instinct, or sheer chance, had managed to circumvent the solar blades and was now spreading its insidious shadow in the warp across the Stanghold and Iron Tower systems, encroaching upon the Radat system. With the Gallows Tower system embroiled in civil war, only 3 of the subsector's 7 Imperial systems remained capable of mounting a defence, as the others were already overrun by Orcs and Necrons. In response, Leontus activated the Sanctuary Protocol, issuing distress calls and pleas for reinforcement to the Segmentum Solar, other anchor worlds and solar blade strongholds. The 3 remaining systems were bolstered as much as possible. Those unable to withdraw were ordered to dig in and hold out for as long as they could, with Leontus acknowledging their sacrifices and the precious time they would buy for the Imperium. As with all things concerning the Tyrannids, the true motives behind Grendillus's focus on the Bastior subsector remained beyond the understanding of mankind's wisest scholars. Even the most astute strategists of the Ordo Xenos could only speculate on when or how the tendril would strike. Many commanders heeded the Sanctuary Protocol, and a diverse array of ships arrived in the 3 systems to bolster their defences, bringing with them millions of troops, war machines, logistical personnel and supplies. Worlds and surveillance patrols were reinforced, and defences grew until they seemed impenetrable. Initial Tyrannid scout fleets were swiftly annihilated. However, the full force of Grendillus overwhelmed world after world in the peripheral systems. While some resigned themselves to their fate, most dug in and prepared to defend their homes, driven by faith, a desire to protect their worlds, or sheer hatred of the Xenos threat. Countless stories of defiance emerged. Captain Veshwalder's troops enduring nightmarish combat on Donjor, the Imperial forces that delayed the Tyrannids at Cornucog, the Rough Riders who brought down the Withered Worm in a suicide charge, and the Dragon War that raged in the skies above Nymir III. Each of these battles showcased the resilience and courage of the human spirit as it clashed with the malevolent might of the Tyrannid swarms. But it was not just humans who fought back. Xenos factions also waged their own desperate battles against the Tyrannid onslaught. Warlord Ortsgog, ruler of the Keepgan system, faced the Tyrannids head-on. The Thurian Major League and the Cronus hegemony of the Votan Leagues united with lost human colonies to stave off the swarms. And in the Pallet system, the Tyranids found themselves caught between the Necrons, Eldari, and Drukhari, turning the conflict into a three-way war that even spilled into the webway. Other Xenos races, such as the Hrud, Mebri, and even a rumoured Jokaero ship, joined the fray, each fighting for survival against the Great Devourer. Despite all the bloodshed, the Tyranid advance continued relentlessly. While the Imperium's forces were finite, the Tyranids seemed endless. Each wave of attacks grew larger and more ferocious, with the short intervals between waves offering little time for recovery. The dead piled up, ammunition reserves dwindled, and morale waned. During the 11th wave, the last defenders of the Stanghalder system were overwhelmed, leading to the system's complete collapse. In the Radat system, the defenders managed to hold out longer, and by the 19th wave, they had still prevented the Tyranids from conquering any planets. In contrast, the Gallows Tower system, embroiled in civil war, was left utterly defenseless against the Tyranid onslaught and suffered devastating losses. As forces were withdrawn from other parts of the subsector, the Tyranid assault intensified in the Pitfire system. The defenders had hoped that the radiation storm surrounding their system would slow the Tyranids down, but instead they faced an onslaught of irradiated Tyranids. To make matters worse, the system was also besieged by a massive Orc force. The only saving grace was that the two xenospecies slaughtered each other as well as the human defenders. The Castale system was next to be stormed, and while the Imperial defences initially held strong, withstanding 7 waves of attacks, the casualties mounted with each engagement. The Tyranids adapted with each wave, and the 8th onslaught was not only larger but also introduced previously unknown bioships with pulsating brain nodes that caused hallucinations and psychosis. These mind-killers deployed waves of psychic creatures that managed to gain a foothold on many worlds. The assault on the Castale and Fossopyra systems, twin sanctuary systems within the Formidire sector, was a harbinger of the imminent doom facing the defenders of Formidire. As the first readings from defense satellites and auger arrays came in, it became evident that this attack was unlike any they had faced before. Tyranid bioships flooded the elliptical plane, encircling the system like the relentless tentacles of a monstrous predatory god. With each passing hour, the number and size of these vile ships swelled, and the shadow in the warp descended upon the defenders like a suffocating miasma, instilling terror and despair. It was during this critical moment, as fear began to gnaw at the resolve of the Imperials, that the experience and foresight of Arcadian Leontus and his veteran command staff proved their worth. Anticipating the severance of astropathic communication, Leontus had pre-recorded motivational speeches to bolster the morale of the troops, and had strategically placed ecclesiastical priests among the garrisons and aboard smaller ships. While this was far from a perfect solution, and the sharp bark of Commissar pistols was heard more than once, many backs straightened, jaws set, and trembling hands steadied. Instead of fleeing like prey, the Imperial defenders braced themselves for the alien onslaught on every world in the system. The conflict raged across hundreds of fronts within the Formidire system. Although the Imperial defences held strong, they could not halt the inexorable advance of the apocalyptic biofleet, which carved a path straight toward Sanctum. Rumours spread that the Tyranids somehow understood the strategic significance of the Point World and were determined to bring it to ruin. Whatever the truth, all available forces were already committed to other fronts, leaving Sanctum isolated and vulnerable against the oncoming swarm. From the towering spire of Gerzelm at the planet's south pole to the orbital battery Smite Stars, from Cruxport Starport to the Solomar Mountains, the defenders of Sanctum prepared themselves for the worst. They huddled in trenches, fortified bunkers, and the White Templar monastery of Fortress Rizoid, where Leontus had established his command sanctuary. All eyes turned skyward as the heavens ignited with the telltale explosions signalling the arrival of the Tyrannid menace. Sanctum was shielded by Dawn's Wall, an asteroid belt stretching over 200,000 miles. Tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus had manipulated some of these asteroids into defensive positions, carving out fortresses within the larger ones. However, these asteroids became the invasion's first battleground. Knowing that this obstacle would only provide a temporary reprieve, Leontus had stationed servitors, penal detachments, and penitent martyrs to man the defences. Despite inflicting significant casualties on the Tyrannids, the bioships tore through the asteroids one by one, slaughtering their defenders and filling the void with toxins. Massive bioships with chitinous prows surged forward, crushing or devouring the asteroids as they cleared a path. The Tyrannid assault on Sanctum was relentless, attacking from all directions. But the Imperials, well aware of Hive Fleet Leviathan's cunning reputation, were ready with a counter-offensive. The Phalanx, with over 300 battle brothers aboard, opened fire with all its might. The two fleets clashed in a storm of gnashing jaws, groaning metal hulls, exploding engines, and kilometre-long spines. Group leader Jacobe led the fight in the Northern Hemisphere, while Tor Garadon commanded from the Phalanx in the south. Their doctrine was simple: prevent the Tyrannids from landing on Sanctum and eliminate the larger bioships to disrupt their coordination. They were more successful in the latter objective, destroying numerous Hive macroships. But it became painfully clear that stopping the deployment of Tyrannid forces was like trying to stem a river with bare hands. Millions, then billions of war organisms landed on Sanctum. Tanks and bombers scoured the landing zones repeatedly, but nothing could halt the Xenos tide. Eventually, the war reached the surface. Fighting on the ground was chaotic. Tyrannids infested the planet's wilds, using the jungles as cover to grow in number with each shower of mycetic spores before launching themselves at the Imperial forces. The Loyalist command ordered armoured counter-offensives whenever possible, emphasising mobility to avoid being besieged by the swarm. The combined might of the Adeptus Astartes, Adeptus Sororitas, Adeptus Mechanicus, Astra Militarum, and other forces won several battles, but the overall strategic situation worsened with each passing day. The Tyrannids also claimed many victories, and their synaptic web expanded as more lead organisms survived the landings, becoming increasingly cunning. The most alarming development was the sighting of the Horde Lord near the Rhizoid, threatening the very heart of the Imperial command. The Imperials were forced to retreat to their fortified positions, many knowing that these would be their final hours. Some fortresses, like those atop Mount Solomar, held firm. Others sent increasingly frantic distress calls as Lictors and von Ryan's jumpers infiltrated their defences. Amidst the unrelenting horror and carnage, none faced a greater onslaught than the defenders of Rizoid. The Lord of the Horde pressed from the west, while hundreds of Trigons and Morlocks erupted from the earth in the east, tearing through the very mountains themselves. The catacombs of Rizoid became a killing ground. With tides of Tyrannid creatures surging through its tunnels, Tyrannid warriors and Primus leading waves of Gaunts, Tervigons birthing fresh swarms, and Venomthropes spreading their toxic spores within the fortress's chambers, but the gravest threat was the trio of Norn emissaries drawing ever closer with terrifying purpose. It was in this dire hour that Solar Lord Leontus and Chapter Master Stavro proved their worth as heroes of the Imperium. Leontus, ever the master tactician, applied his strategic acumen to the battle, while using his charisma and leadership to maintain morale among the beleaguered defenders. When not directing troop movements, he rode the battlements and marshalling yards on his cyber steed, Unflinching even as spore mines exploded against the void shields, his presence uplifted the spirits of both human and post-human warriors alike. His quarter-mile-long entourage of bodyguards, advisors, and communication officers always at his side, ensuring he was never unaware of the shifting tides of battle. While Leontus was the heart of the defenders, Stavro was their unyielding fist. When the Trigons and Molochs breached the depths of Rizoid, Stavro led every counterattack. Where massive siege beasts threatened the lines, he spearheaded armoured assaults and gunship strikes. Tireless, furious, and seemingly invincible, despite the acid burns scarring his armour, Stavro's defiance became the bulwark of the defence. Yet they were not alone in their valiant stand. From the defence of Zyglos Gate to the recapture of the Precipice batteries, acts of selfless valour and desperate determination abounded, enough to fill entire libraries with tales of heroism. Even so, the Tyrannid steadily gained ground, taking positions within the fortress monastery. As the battle raged, the defenders suffered mounting casualties, and the fortress itself sustained increasing damage. Meanwhile, the three Norn emissaries continued their hunt, each with a target known only to them. On the 8th day, one emissary struck, compressing its mass to impossibly fit within a turbolift tube and ascending to a command post where it slaughtered hundreds of tacticians and command adepts and destroyed irreplaceable cogitators. The creature might have escaped if not for a chapter servant, who detonated the shrine's self-destruct mechanism, sacrificing himself to obliterate the beast. The second emissary, known as the Hag's Rift Demon, due to its scars, emerged from a Trigon tunnel and assaulted the White Templar's Gene Seed Vault, supported by hordes of warriors and 2 neuro-tyrants. In response, nearly 20 dreadnoughts marched from the chapter repose vaults. Most fell in battle, but they bought enough time for reinforcements led by Stavro himself, though the Rift Demon managed to escape. The third emissary targeted the most crucial objective. Climbing to the peak of Artoris Heights, it awaited its prey. When Leontus passed through Ascendorum Plaza below, the emissary leaped, claws outstretched, intent on crushing the Solar Lord beneath its mass. Though the alarm was raised, it was too late to evade the creature's strike. Only the timely arrival of an Adeptus Custodes aircraft diverted the beast's trajectory. Trajan Valoris severed several of its claws, and the Custodes slashed and shot at the creature, but it fought on, fixated on its mission to kill Leontus. However, Valoris was there at the critical moment, delivering the killing blow that crushed the emissary's head. Only Valoris and one custodian survived the battle, but Leontus had been saved. Valoris had not come alone. He brought with him a significant number of solar blades, along with other Imperial forces who had answered the distress calls from Bastior. Valoris distributed the forces across the systems, navigating the treacherous warp, blinded by the shadow in the warp. Despite the difficulties, the reinforcements brought much-needed relief to the defenders, turning the tide in several planetary battles. Though the war for the Bastior subsector had been rescued from the brink of collapse, the Tyrannid infestation remained a dire threat. Sanctum was still under siege, and the Lord of the Horde remained at large. Furthermore, with the possibility that too many solar blades had been diverted to reinforce the Imperials, the tendrils Promothor and Nautilon might resume their advance unchecked. Sanctum was far from safe, as Captain Geron had sighted a massive bioship, the size of a moon, heading directly for the Point World. The war had only just begun, and the days ahead promised even greater escalation.